Eleanor Sullivan's hand trembled as she crumpled the letter from the doctor in Boston, tears blurring the damning words that confirmed what the townsfolk of Copper Creek, Colorado, had whispered behind her back for years. At 26, the finality of it struck her like a physical blow. She would never bear children of her own. The year was 1875, and in the unforgiving landscape of Colorado's mining country, a woman's worth was too often measured by the children she could produce. Eleanor had endured 5 years of marriage to Frederick Sullivan before his death in the mines, 5 years of disappointed hopes and monthly heartbreak. Now a widow of 2 years with nothing but her small boarding house to show for it, the whispers had grown louder, more cruel. "Such a shame, Mrs. Porter," said loudly enough for Eleanor to hear as she passed the general store that morning. "Pretty enough, but barren as the desert. No wonder Frederick worked himself to death in those mines. What man wants to come home to empty rooms that should be filled with children?" Eleanor quickened her pace, clutching her market basket tighter as laughter followed her down the dusty main street. She kept her chin up, though her throat constricted with unshed tears. The boarding house, once Frederick's family home, stood at the edge of town, a 2-story clapboard building that had seen better days. It wasn't much, but it was hers, the only thing keeping her from destitution. As she approached, she spotted an unfamiliar horse tied to the hitching post, tall and muscular with a gleaming chestnut coat. A new boarder, perhaps. Eleanor wiped her eyes quickly and straightened her simple blue dress before climbing the steps to the porch. The stranger sat in one of her rocking chairs, his long legs stretched before him, hat tipped low over his eyes. At the sound of her footsteps he stood, revealing his impressive height. Dust from the trail covered his worn denim pants and leather vest, but there was something commanding about the way he carried himself. "Madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal hair the color of wheat fields and eyes as blue as a summer sky. "Name's Henry Crawford. Heard you might have a room to let." Eleanor found her voice, though it came out softer than intended. "Yes, I do have a vacancy, Mr. Crawford. $3 a week includes breakfast and dinner." He smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his weather-beaten face. "That's mighty reasonable. I expect to be in town a spell. Just bought the old Jenkins ranch outside town." Eleanor's eyebrows rose in surprise. The Jenkins place had been abandoned for years, ever since old man Jenkins and his sons had headed to California during the gold rush. 500 acres of decent grazing land with a dilapidated house and barn. That's quite an undertaking, Mr. Crawford. "Henry, please," he insisted, following her into the house. "And yes, madam, it is. But I've got plans, cattle operation, Colorado's growing, and folks need beef." Eleanor led him upstairs to the best room she had available, acutely aware of his presence behind her. Something about him seemed solid, dependable qualities in short supply in a boom and bust town like Copper Creek. "Dinner's at 6 sharp," she informed him as she handed over the key. "I don't tolerate drunkenness or disorderly behavior in my house." Henry's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Yes, madam, I'm a peaceable man just looking to put down roots." Those words stirred something in Eleanor that she thought had died with Frederick, but she pushed the feeling aside. She'd learned the hard way that dreams were fragile things in the West. Over the following weeks, Eleanor found Henry Crawford to be unlike any man she'd encountered in Copper Creek. He rose early, worked from dawn till dusk at his ranch, but always returned clean and presentable for dinner. He spoke little about himself, but listened intently when others talked. The other boarders, 2 miners and an aging shopkeeper, seemed to respect him. Henry's presence became a comforting constant in Eleanor's life. He always thanked her for meals, offered to fix things around the boarding house, and defended her subtly when others made cutting remarks. Eleanor hadn't realized how lonely she'd been until companionship appeared at her table each evening. One Sunday afternoon in June, Eleanor was hanging laundry in the backyard when Mrs. Porter and her daughter Lucille stopped by uninvited. "Eleanor, dear," Mrs. Porter called sweetly, though her eyes were sharp as flint. "We were just speaking with Reverend Williams about the charity drive for the orphans in Denver. Seeing as you've been blessed with ample time, having no children of your own to tend to, we thought you might want to contribute." Eleanor felt the familiar sting but kept her expression neutral. "Of course, I'd be happy to donate what I can." Lucille, recently married and already expecting her first child, placed a protective hand over her swelling belly. "It must be such a comfort, helping those poor motherless children when you cannot have any yourself, almost like having a purpose." The words cut deep, as intended. Eleanor's hands trembled as she pinned a sheet to the line. Before she could respond, a deep voice called from the back porch. "Afternoon, ladies." Henry descended the steps, hat in hand, nodding politely to the Porter women. His presence seemed to fill the small yard. "Mr. Crawford," Mrs. Porter purred, instantly transforming her demeanor. "How wonderful to see you. I trust you're finding our little town hospitable." "Indeed," Henry replied, moving to stand beside Eleanor. "Especially thanks to Mrs. Sullivan's exceptional hospitality. I've never eaten better meals or stayed in a more well-kept home." Eleanor felt a rush of gratitude at his words. Mrs. Porter's smile tightened. "Yes, well, Eleanor has always been domestic. Such a shame she never had the blessing of children. A real family home needs children's laughter. Don't you agree, Mr. Crawford?" Henry's eyes narrowed slightly, though his expression remained polite. "I believe a real family isn't measured by numbers, Mrs. Porter, but by love and respect. Now, if you'll excuse us, I promise to help Mrs. Sullivan with some repairs this afternoon." After they left, Eleanor turned to Henry with questioning eyes. "There are no repairs scheduled," he smiled, the warmth reaching his eyes. "There are now. That back step's been wobbly for weeks. Besides, seemed like you could use a rescue." "Thank you," Eleanor said softly. "You didn't have to do that." "I know what it's like to be judged unfairly," Henry replied, his voice taking on a distant quality. "Folks can be cruel about things beyond our control." That evening, after the other boarders had retired, Eleanor found Henry on the front porch, smoking a pipe and gazing at the stars. She brought him a cup of coffee and sat in the rocker beside him. "May I ask you something, Mr. Crawford?" "Henry," he reminded her gently. "And yes, you may. Why did you really come to Copper Creek? A man with your resources could have settled anywhere." Henry took a long draw from his pipe before answering. "I was raised in Texas, had a small ranch there with my wife, Margaret." His voice softened on the name. "We had plans, dreams. A future mapped out. Then the fever took her 6 years ago." "I'm so sorry," Eleanor whispered, understanding the grief that lingered in his words. "After that, I couldn't stay. Drifted for a while, worked other men's cattle, fought in skirmishes against raiders. Nothing felt right until I saw this valley." He gestured toward the mountains silhouetted against the night sky. "Something about it reminded me of her. She would have loved it here." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "My Frederick died in a mine collapse. I understand what it's like to lose the future you planned." Henry's gaze met hers, recognition of shared pain passing between them. "We're quite the pair, aren't we? Both trying to build something new from broken pieces." The conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. In the days that followed, Eleanor found herself looking forward to Henry's return each evening. He began spending his Sundays helping around the boarding house instead of at his ranch. They worked side by side, repairing furniture, painting shutters, replanting the neglected garden. On a sweltering July afternoon, Henry arrived with a surprise, a beautiful oak bookshelf for the parlor. "You mentioned wanting somewhere proper to display those books your father left you," he explained as he positioned it against the wall. "Made it myself." Eleanor ran her fingers over the smooth wood, touched beyond words. No one had paid such attention to her casual comments since Frederick died. "It's beautiful, Henry. Thank you." That evening, disaster struck. Eleanor was preparing dinner when she heard frantic knocking at the front door. She opened it to find little Tommy Green, the blacksmith's son, wide-eyed and breathless. "Mrs. Sullivan, there's been a cave-in at the Silver Strike mine. Pa sent me to tell everyone they need help digging men out." The words struck Eleanor like physical blows. Memories of the day Frederick died rushed back, the same desperate knocking, the same plea for help, the same ultimate heartbreak of bodies carried from the mountain. "I'll go," Henry said immediately, already reaching for his coat. "Eleanor, keep water boiling and prepare bandages. The injured will need somewhere to recover." Before she could protest, Henry was gone, rushing toward the mine alongside every able-bodied man in town. Eleanor forced her trembling hands to work, setting water to boil, tearing sheets into bandages, clearing the dining room to make space for the injured. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Night fell, and still no word. Eleanor paced the porch, straining to see through the darkness toward the mine entrance visible on the mountainside. When torches finally appeared, moving slowly down the path toward town, she clutched the porch railing, her heart in her throat. The procession arrived, grim-faced men carrying makeshift stretchers bearing the injured. 8 miners had been trapped, 6 were brought out alive. Henry walked alongside one stretcher, his clothes blackened with coal dust, his face streaked with sweat and grime. Eleanor rushed forward to help direct the injured into her dining room, now transformed into an infirmary. Dr. Whittaker moved from man to man, assessing injuries, giving instructions. Eleanor worked tirelessly, bringing water, holding lanterns, comforting those in pain. It was nearly dawn when the last miner was stabilized. Eleanor stepped onto the porch for a moment of air and found Henry sitting on the steps, his head in his hands. "Are you hurt?" she asked, kneeling beside him. He looked up, his eyes haunted. "No, just remembering. I worked the mines in Colorado before I had my ranch in Texas. Saw too many good men crushed beneath the earth." Eleanor sat beside him, their shoulders touching. "I lost Frederick that way. Sometimes I still wake up thinking I hear the warning bell from the mine." Henry took her hand then, his large palm engulfing her smaller one. They sat in silence as the first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky. In the days that followed, Eleanor's boarding house became a recovery ward. Families brought food, the company doctor visited daily, and Henry postponed work on his ranch to help tend to the injured men. Eleanor watched him sit with them, tell stories to distract them from pain, write letters to their families when their hands were too injured to hold a pen. One evening, as they sat on the porch after the others had gone to sleep, Henry turned to her with unusual seriousness. "Eleanor, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." Her heart quickened. "Yes. Would you consider coming out to see the ranch tomorrow? I've made progress on the house, and I'd value your opinion on some things." Though not what she'd expected, the invitation pleased her. "I'd like that very much." The next day, Henry arrived with his wagon. The journey to the Jenkins property took less than an hour, and Eleanor gasped when the ranch house came into view. What had once been a dilapidated cabin was now a respectable home. Fresh lumber gleamed in the sunlight where Henry had replaced rotted walls and added a new porch. The barn had been partially rebuilt, and a corral held several horses and a small herd of cattle. "Henry, this is remarkable," Eleanor exclaimed as he helped her down from the wagon. "You've accomplished so much in such a short time." Pride shone in his eyes as he offered his arm. "Come see inside." The interior was simple but solid, a large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a new cast iron stove, and 2 bedrooms. The furniture was sparse but well made. "I built most of it myself," Henry explained, watching her face as she explored. "It needs a woman's touch, though." Eleanor ran her fingers along a pine table in the kitchen. "It's wonderful, Henry. A real home." He looked at her intently. "It could be, with the right person." Before she could respond, Henry guided her outside to show her the spring house and garden plot. They spent the afternoon touring the property, with Henry explaining his plans for cattle breeding and describing the wild beauty of the land in different seasons. As the sun began to set, they sat on the new porch, sharing a simple meal Henry had prepared. In the distance, the mountains glowed purple and gold in the fading light. "I never thought I'd find peace again after Margaret died," Henry said quietly. "This land has given me purpose, but it's still missing something vital." Eleanor felt his gaze on her profile but kept her eyes on the sunset. "What's that?" "Someone to share it with." His hand found hers on the porch railing. "Eleanor, I know it hasn't been long, but I feel a connection to you I never expected to find again. You understand loss. You know the value of building something new." Eleanor's heart raced. "Henry," a distant rumble of thunder interrupted her. Henry looked at the darkening sky with concern. "Storm's coming. We should head back before it hits." The rain caught them halfway to town, a sudden summer downpour that soaked them within minutes. By the time they reached the boarding house, water streamed from their clothes and hair. Eleanor rushed to find towels, acutely aware of Henry's presence as he removed his sodden coat in the kitchen. When she returned, he stood by the stove, his shirt clinging to the broad planes of his chest. She handed him a towel, careful not to let their fingers touch. "Eleanor," he said softly, not drying himself, "I need to say this. I care for you deeply. I believe we could build something meaningful together, but I know about the letter from the doctor in Boston." She froze, her breath catching. "How did you? Mrs. Porter has a loose tongue after Sunday service. I heard her telling the Reverend's wife." Humiliation washed over Eleanor. Of course everyone knew her shame. "Then you understand why any man would be better off looking elsewhere. I cannot give you children, Henry. I cannot be a proper wife." Henry's expression hardened. "Is that what Frederick told you, that you weren't a proper wife because you couldn't conceive?" "No," Eleanor protested, tears forming. "Frederick was kind. He never blamed me, but I saw his disappointment each month. I watched his eyes follow the children in town. He wanted a family so badly." "And you, what did you want?" "The same," she whispered. "To be a mother, to create a family with the man I loved, but it wasn't meant to be." Henry stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. "There are more ways to make a family than bearing children, Eleanor. There are children who need homes, love, protection. The orphanage in Denver is overflowing with them." Eleanor's heart constricted at the thought. "You would consider that, taking in another's child?" "I would consider anything that would make us a family," Henry said simply. "If you'd have me." Before she could respond, a knock at the door announced the return of her other boarders. The moment shattered, and Henry retreated to his room with a lingering glance that left Eleanor trembling. That night, sleep eluded her as she considered Henry's words. The possibility of a life with him, of building a family through means she hadn't dared to consider, filled her with equal parts hope and fear. The next morning, Eleanor rose early to prepare breakfast, only to find the kitchen already occupied. Henry stood at the stove, frying bacon with practiced ease. "Good morning," he said, his smile tentative. "Thought I'd give you a hand." They worked together in comfortable silence, preparing food for the other boarders. As Eleanor set the table, Henry spoke quietly so only she could hear. "I've been thinking about what I said yesterday. I want you to know I meant every word, but I don't expect an answer right away. Take all the time you need." Eleanor nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Thank you, Henry." Later that day, Eleanor was sweeping the front porch when Lucille Porter approached, her pregnant belly now prominently displayed beneath her expensive dress. "Eleanor, I wanted to invite you to my baby's christening celebration next month," she announced, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Mother thought it would be charitable to include you despite, well, you know." Eleanor tightened her grip on the broom handle. "How thoughtful of you both." Lucille glanced around before leaning closer. "I heard Mr. Crawford spent the entire day with you at that ranch of his yesterday. You should be careful, Eleanor. People are talking." "Are they?" Eleanor replied evenly. "How fascinating that they have nothing better to discuss." "Mother says it's unseemly, a widow your age spending time unchaperoned with a man," Lucille persisted. "Especially when everyone knows you can't give him children. It seems almost deceptive." The accusation stung, but before Eleanor could respond, the door opened behind her. Henry stood there, his expression thunderous as he stared at Lucille. "Mrs. Tanner," he said coldly, "I believe your husband is looking for you at the mercantile. Something about not approving certain purchases you made." Lucille paled. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean, don't you?" "Funny, he seemed quite certain about those French perfumes and silk ribbons you've been ordering without his knowledge." Henry's smile was sharp as a knife. "Good day, madam." After a flustered Lucille departed, Eleanor turned to Henry with wide eyes. "Is that true, about her husband?" Henry's expression softened. "Overheard it at the barber shop yesterday. Tanner was complaining about the bills." He stepped closer. "Eleanor, don't let them get to you. Their cruelty says more about them than it ever could about you." That night, unable to sleep, Eleanor slipped downstairs to make tea. To her surprise, she found Henry at the kitchen table, a ledger open before him. "Trouble sleeping?" he asked, closing the book. Eleanor nodded. "My thoughts won't quiet you." "Same." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Join me." They sat in comfortable silence as Eleanor sipped her tea. Finally, she gathered her courage. "Henry, about what you said, about children who need homes." His eyes lifted to hers, hope visible in their blue depths. "Yes. I've never considered it before. Not because I wouldn't love a child that wasn't born to me, but because as a widow alone, I didn't think I'd be allowed to adopt." Henry reached across the table to take her hand. "You wouldn't be alone, Eleanor, not if you don't want to be." The tenderness in his voice melted something inside her that had been frozen since Frederick's death. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Henry Crawford?" "I'm asking if you'd consider becoming my wife," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I'm asking if you'd build a life with me, a family in whatever way God allows." Eleanor felt tears spill down her cheeks. "People will talk. They'll say you settled for less than you deserve." Henry's jaw tightened. "Let them talk. I know your worth, Eleanor Sullivan, even if they're too blind to see it." "Yes," she whispered, her heart overflowing. "Yes, I'll marry you, Henry." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds as he rose and came around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. His kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as Eleanor responded, her hands finding his shoulders, her body melting against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Henry pressed his forehead to hers. "I promise you won't regret this." "I know," Eleanor replied, feeling truly hopeful for the first time in years. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church, with only a few friends in attendance. The Porters and their circle made a point of not coming, but Eleanor found she didn't care. The look in Henry's eyes as she walked toward him in her best blue dress was worth all the gossip in Colorado. That night, in the master bedroom of the ranch house, now their home, Eleanor discovered the healing power of being truly loved. Henry's hands and lips were reverent on her skin, his whispered words of adoration banishing the doubts that had plagued her for years. In his arms, she wasn't defined by what her body couldn't do, but celebrated for who she was. Later, wrapped in quilts and each other's arms, Henry shared his plans. "I've written to the orphanage in Denver. They're bringing a group of children to Boulder next month for potential placements. We could go meet them." Eleanor traced the line of his jaw in the moonlight. "I'd like that very much." Life settled into a rhythm of hard work and simple pleasures. Eleanor learned to run a ranch alongside managing their home. Henry proved to be a patient teacher, never making her feel inadequate when she struggled with new tasks. Together they repainted every room in the house, planted a large vegetable garden, and added curtains and rugs that transformed the space into a true home. Word came that the orphan train would arrive in Boulder on September 15th. As the date approached, Eleanor alternated between excitement and anxiety. "What if none of the children take to us?" she worried as they prepared for the journey. "What if we're not chosen?" Henry wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Then we'll try again, and again. The right child will find us, Eleanor. I believe that." Boulder was larger than Copper Creek, a university town with brick buildings and proper sidewalks. The orphan train had arrived the previous day, and the children were being housed at the Methodist church while interviews took place. Eleanor clutched Henry's hand as they entered the church hall. About 20 children of various ages sat or stood in small groups, wearing their best clothes, faces scrubbed clean. Some looked hopeful, others resigned, a few openly fearful. A stern-faced woman with a clipboard approached them. "Mr. and Mrs. Crawford, I'm Miss Abernathy from the Denver Children's Home. You indicated interest in adopting." "Yes, madam," Henry replied respectfully. "We're hoping to provide a good home to a child in need." Miss Abernathy consulted her notes. "You're ranchers. Do you have experience with children?" "I was a teacher back east before my first marriage," Eleanor offered, "and Henry has younger siblings he helped raise." The woman seemed satisfied. "Very well. You may speak with the children, but please understand that final placements will be decided by the home's board based on suitability." As they moved among the children, Eleanor felt overwhelmed. Each face told a story of loss. Each pair of eyes held questions she wasn't sure she could answer. How did one choose? How could anyone decide which child deserved a home more than another? In the corner of the room, partially hidden behind a column, sat a girl of about 10. Unlike the others, she wasn't trying to attract attention. Her dark hair was neatly braided and she clutched a tattered book in her lap. Beside her stood a smaller boy, perhaps 6 or 7, his hand firmly in hers. Something drew Eleanor toward them. As she approached, the girl looked up warily, her arm moving protectively around the boy. "Hello," Eleanor said gently, crouching to be at their level. "My name is Eleanor Crawford, and this is my husband, Henry." The girl nodded politely but didn't speak. The little boy peered at them with curious eyes. "What's your name?" Henry asked, his voice softening in a way Eleanor had never heard before. "Sarah," the girl answered finally. "And this is my brother James. He doesn't talk much to strangers." Eleanor noticed how Sarah's fingers tightened on the book, a worn copy of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. "That's a wonderful story," she commented. "Do you enjoy reading, Sarah?" A flicker of interest crossed the girl's face. "Yes, madam, when I can. At the home, we don't get much time for books." "I love reading too," Eleanor told her. "We have quite a few books at our ranch. Henry built me a beautiful bookshelf for them." The boy James looked up at Henry with new interest. "You build things," Henry nodded. "All sorts of things. Furniture, fences, barns. Could you build a treehouse?" James asked, speaking for the first time, his voice small but clear. "James," Sarah warned quietly. "It's all right," Henry assured her. "And yes, James, I could definitely build a treehouse. We have some perfect trees on our property for one." As they continued talking, Eleanor learned that Sarah and James had been at the orphanage for 2 years, since their parents died of influenza. They'd been sent to 3 different homes but always returned, not because of any fault of theirs. Sarah was quick to explain, but because no one wanted 2 children, especially when one was a boy with too much energy, as James had apparently been described. "We stay together," Sarah said firmly, her young face determined beyond her years. "I promised Mama before she died." Eleanor met Henry's eyes, seeing her own thoughts reflected there. Without needing to discuss it, they both knew. "Miss Abernathy," Henry called, gesturing the matron over. "We'd like to discuss the possibility of adopting Sarah and James." The woman frowned. 2 children is quite an undertaking, especially for new parents. The board generally prefers to place siblings separately to improve their chances. Eleanor felt Sarah stiffen beside her. "We understand it's a responsibility, but we have a good home, plenty of room and resources to provide for both children, and we strongly believe siblings should remain together whenever possible." Miss Abernathy studied them thoughtfully. "There would be a trial period, of course. 3 months minimum before any adoption could be finalized." "Of course," Henry agreed readily. "And there will be home visits, assessments of the children's adjustment." "We welcome them," Eleanor assured her. After much paperwork and a thorough interview about their resources and intentions, Henry and Eleanor were granted temporary guardianship of Sarah and James. The children had few possessions, some clothes, Sarah's book, a small wooden horse that had belonged to James's father, and a locket containing a tiny portrait of their parents that Sarah wore around her neck. The journey home was quiet, the children watchful and uncertain despite their best efforts to make them comfortable. Eleanor understood their caution. They'd been disappointed before, had learned not to trust too quickly or hope too deeply. As they crested the final hill and the ranch came into view, Eleanor heard James's small intake of breath. "Is that where we're going to live?" he asked, his eyes wide. "That's our home," Henry confirmed, pride evident in his voice. "What do you think?" James bounced slightly on the wagon seat. "It's bigger than I thought. Is there really a creek? Miss Sarah said there might be a creek." "There is," Eleanor assured him, delighting in his sudden animation. "And plenty of safe places to explore, though you must always tell us where you're going." Sarah remained silent, taking everything in with watchful eyes. Eleanor didn't push her. Trust would come with time and consistency. The first few weeks were a careful dance of establishing routines and boundaries. Sarah was unfailingly polite, but kept an emotional distance, while James alternated between exuberant exploration and sudden withdrawals into silence. Both children woke with nightmares, calling for parents who couldn't answer. On their 3rd week at the ranch, Eleanor found Sarah sitting alone on the porch steps, staring at the mountains. "May I join you?" Eleanor asked softly. Sarah nodded, making room. They sat in silence for several minutes. "You don't have to worry so much, you know," Eleanor finally said. "About James, about doing everything perfectly. You're allowed to be a child, too." Sarah's shoulders tensed. "I promised Mama I'd take care of him, the other places. They didn't understand. They thought he was difficult, but he's not. He just misses them. He was so little when they died." Eleanor's heart ached for this child who'd carried such responsibility. "Your mother would be very proud of how you've cared for him, but now you have Henry and me to help. You don't have to do it alone anymore." Sarah looked at her then, her eyes wary but hopeful. "What if something happens to you too? What if you decide you don't want us after all?" "Oh, Sarah," Eleanor said, fighting tears. "We're not going anywhere, and there is nothing you could do that would make us send you away. You and James belong here now with us." The girl's composure cracked, and suddenly she was sobbing, deep racking cries that shook her small frame. Eleanor gathered her close, rocking her gently as she would have a much younger child, letting her release grief that had been contained for too long. That night at dinner, Sarah asked if she might call them Aunt Eleanor and Uncle Henry instead of Mrs. Crawford and Mr. Crawford. "If that would make you comfortable, of course," Henry replied, though Eleanor saw the flash of disappointment in his eyes. "It's just, I had a mother and father," Sarah explained carefully. "I don't want to forget them." Henry reached across the table to cover her small hand with his. "We would never want you to forget them, Sarah. They'll always be your parents. But there's room in your heart for more love, and there's room in our family for you to be whatever you need to be." By the time Miss Abernathy came for her first inspection visit in late October, the changes were remarkable. James had discovered a passion for helping Henry with the animals, following him like a shadow during chores. Sarah had been astonished to discover Eleanor's collection of books and spent hours reading in the window seat Henry had built especially for her. The house rang with children's voices, with questions and laughter and occasional arguments that were quickly resolved. Meals became lively affairs, with stories shared about the day's activities. In the evenings, they gathered in the main room, Henry whittling small animals for James while Eleanor helped Sarah with her reading or taught her to knit. Miss Abernathy could find little to criticize. The children were clean, well-fed, educated, and visibly attached to their new guardians. She promised to return in December for her final assessment before the adoption could be approved. As the first snow dusted the mountains, preparations for Christmas began. Eleanor taught Sarah to make cookie dough and cranberry garlands. Henry took James to choose a pine tree from their property, which they set up in the main room and decorated with homemade ornaments and candles. On Christmas Eve, after the children were asleep, Henry and Eleanor sat before the fire, admiring the tree. "I never thought I could be this happy again," Eleanor confessed, leaning against his shoulder. "When Frederick died, I believed that was the end of all my dreams." Henry kissed the top of her head. "I felt the same after losing Margaret. But life has a way of creating new dreams when the old ones die. They're wonderful, aren't they? The children. They are. Sarah reminds me of you, strong, protective, with a heart as big as the sky but cautious about showing it." Eleanor laughed softly. "And James is you all over again, curious about everything, determined to master every skill, never afraid to try something new." Henry's arm tightened around her. "They're ours, Eleanor, maybe not by birth, but by choice, which seems even more meaningful somehow." On Christmas morning, the children's delight in their modest gifts, new boots and a carved horse for James, books and a pretty shawl for Sarah, brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. When the last present had been opened, Henry cleared his throat. "There's one more gift, actually, for all of us." He produced an official-looking document. "Miss Abernathy delivered this yesterday while you were all baking. The adoption has been approved. Sarah, James, if you still want it, you're officially Crawfords now." James whooped with excitement, but Sarah sat very still, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she looked up at Henry and Eleanor. Would it be all right if I called you mother and father now? Not to replace them," she added quickly, touching the locket at her neck, "but because I love you too." Eleanor couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Henry answered for both of them, his voice rough with emotion. Nothing would make us happier, Sarah. That night, long after the children were asleep, Eleanor stood at the window watching snow fall gently in the moonlight. Henry's arms encircled her waist as he joined her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "About the day we met. How empty my life was, how hopeless I felt after getting that letter from the doctor. I never imagined then that barely a year later I'd have all this, you, the children, this home, this love." Henry turned her to face him. "When I first saw you on that porch, something told me you were the one who would help me build a new life. I just didn't know how right I was." Eleanor smiled through tears of happiness. "They mocked me for being barren, but they were wrong. My life is so full now, Henry, so very full." "And it's only the beginning," he promised, sealing his words with a kiss. The years that followed proved Henry right. Sarah and James thrived under their care, growing into confident, kind young people who brought pride to their adoptive parents. The family expanded further when, 2 years later, they adopted twin girls Mary and Elizabeth, whose mother had died in childbirth, and whose father couldn't care for them alone. Eleanor's boarding house in town was sold and transformed into Copper Creek's first proper school, with Eleanor herself as the teacher. Henry's cattle operation prospered, allowing them to help other families in need and to establish a fund for orphan children. The Porters eventually left town after Mr. Porter's business failed, their cruel whispers forgotten as Eleanor's family became beloved fixtures in the community. The Crawford Ranch became known as a place of welcome, where those in need could find help, and those without family could find belonging. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the summer twilight, Henry took Eleanor's hand. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Eleanor shook her head, her heart full to bursting as she watched Sarah, now 20, teaching the younger children a clapping game. James, at 16, was already as tall as Henry and showed the same gentle strength. The twins, 8 years old and inseparable, were the family's sunbeams with their matching smiles and boundless energy. "Not a single one," she answered truthfully. "We found our family just as you promised we would." Henry's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "So we did. And what a beautiful family it is." As the sun set behind the mountains they both loved, Eleanor leaned her head on her husband's shoulder, grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought them here to this land, to these children, to each other. The path had not been what she expected, but it had led to a joy deeper and richer than she had ever dared to dream.